It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. The sun hung quietly in the sky, casting a warm glow over the city streets. People moved about their day, conversations, footsteps, distant traffic blending into a familiar rhythm of normal life. And among them stood Steven Seagal. Dressed simply in black, calm as ever, he wasn't trying to draw attention. He didn't need to. His presence alone carried something different, not loud, not flashy, just steady. He stood near a small outdoor cafe, speaking quietly with someone beside him. His posture relaxed. His expression neutral. Observing more than speaking. But sometimes, calm attracts challenge. From across the sidewalk, a police officer noticed him. At first, it was just a glance. Then a longer stare. Then, a decision. The officer began walking toward him, slow, deliberate steps. The energy shifted almost immediately. Conversations nearby softened. A few heads turned. The officer stopped just a few feet away. "Sir, I need to ask you a few questions." The tone wasn't polite. It wasn't neutral. It carried suspicion. Steven looked up slowly. No sudden movements. No irritation. Just eye contact, steady and controlled. "Yes," he replied calmly. "What are you doing here?" It was a simple question. But not really. Because it wasn't about the question. It was about tone. It was about assumption. It was about authority testing presence. The officer's posture stiffened. His hand rested close to his belt. Not aggressive, but not relaxed either. People nearby began to notice something wasn't right. A couple across the patio subtly pulled out their phones. Not openly recording yet. Just ready. Steven could feel the shift in atmosphere. Most people, when confronted like this, feel something rise inside them. Ego. Defensiveness. The need to assert dominance. But his face remained unreadable. Still. Composed. Almost. Patient. The officer repeated the question, sharper this time. "I asked you what you're doing here." A brief silence followed. The kind of silence that stretches longer than it should. And then, Steven spoke. Not loudly. Not angrily. But with something far more powerful. And what he said next is something most people will never truly understand. The officer's eyes narrowed slightly. The air between them felt heavier now. "I asked you a question," the officer repeated, this time with more edge in his voice. "What are you doing here?" Around them, the quiet cafe no longer felt casual. Conversations slowed. A chair scraped softly against the pavement. Someone across the patio subtly lifted their phone, now clearly recording. But Steven Seagal did not react the way most people would. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't mirror the aggression in front of him. Instead, he answered evenly. "I'm standing," he said calmly, "just like everyone else." It wasn't sarcasm. It was observation. And that difference matters. Because when authority becomes emotional, most people respond emotionally back. It's human nature. When someone challenges your dignity in public, your pride feels attacked. Your heartbeat rises. Your mind prepares for confrontation. Psychologists call this an ego trigger, the moment your identity feels threatened. And in that moment, most people lose control. But control is exactly what separates reaction from strength. Let me ask you something. If someone challenged you like this in public, would you react immediately? Or would you stay silent and observe? Be honest with yourself. And tell me, which country and city are you watching this from? I'm curious how many strong minds around the world understand this kind of discipline. The officer took a step closer. "You think this is funny?" he asked. Steven's expression didn't change. "No," he replied softly. "I think it's unnecessary." The word landed heavier than expected. Unnecessary. Not disrespectful. Not abusive. Just unnecessary. And that choice of language shifted something subtle in the air. See, there's a difference between defending your ego and defending your principles. When you defend your ego, you try to win. When you defend your principles, you try to stay grounded. The officer wasn't satisfied. His jaw tightened. Do you have identification on you? Another pause. Not a defiant pause. A measured one. Steven slowly reached into his pocket. Deliberate movements, no sudden gestures. The crowd's attention sharpened. Because tension doesn't always explode. Sometimes it builds quietly. And what most people don't understand is this. Real power doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It doesn't perform. It waits. And as the officer stared at him, expecting resistance, maybe even fear, he got something else entirely. Calm. Unshakable calm. And that calm was beginning to frustrate him. Because when aggression finds nothing to push against, it starts collapsing under its own weight. But the situation wasn't over. In fact, it was just getting started. The officer examined the identification briefly, barely glancing at it before handing it back. His expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "You seem very calm," the officer said, almost accusingly. "Most people get nervous in situations like this." It wasn't a compliment. It was a challenge. Around them, more phones were visible now. The quiet cafe had transformed into a silent audience. Strangers pretending not to stare, but staring anyway. Tension has a sound. It's the absence of normal noise. And in that silence, the officer took another step forward. "I could detain you," he said firmly. "For obstructing. For non-compliance. Don't test me." There it was. The threat. Subtle, but clear. Most people at this moment would feel something ignite inside their chest. Adrenaline. Anger. The need to push back. Because when someone uses power to intimidate you publicly, your instinct screams, "Defend yourself." And this is where character is revealed. Not when things are easy, but when pressure increases. If you were standing there, surrounded by strangers, being spoken to like that, would you stay calm? Or would you fight back? Type one word in the comments right now. Calm or fight. Because this moment defines more than just pride. It defines discipline. Steven Seagal didn't flinch. He didn't puff his chest. He didn't step backward either. He simply stood still. Grounded. There's something most people misunderstand about strength. They think strength is loud. They think it's about dominance, about proving you can overpower the other person. But loud strength is often insecure strength. Quiet strength is controlled. And control is harder than aggression. Steven finally spoke, slowly, deliberately. "If you need to detain me," he said, his voice steady, "then do what you believe is right." No sarcasm. No fear. Just acceptance. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Because confidence without resistance is unsettling. The officer blinked, slightly thrown off by the response. He had expected pushback. Argument. Maybe even defiance. Instead, he was facing something far more difficult to handle. Composure. And then Steven added something that cut deeper than anger ever could. "Power," he said quietly, "is tested most when it's challenged by calm." The words didn't echo loudly. They didn't need to. They settled. Heavy. A few people in the crowd exchanged looks. The energy was changing. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The officer's authority was no longer dominating the space. It was being observed, measured. And suddenly, the situation wasn't just about a confrontation anymore. It was about a lesson. And the officer hadn't realized yet that he was standing in the middle of it. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. The officer stood face to face with Steven Seagal, trying to reassert control over a moment that was quietly slipping away from him. But something subtle had changed. It started with a whisper. A young man near the back of the cafe leaned toward his friend and said softly, "Wait, isn't that Steven Seagal?" His friend looked again. Squinted. The glasses. The posture. The unmistakable presence. "I think it is." Whispers spread the way they always do, quietly at first, then with growing certainty. "That's him. The martial arts guy. The movie star." No way. Phones that were once recording tension were now recording recognition. But here's the interesting part. Steven didn't react. He didn't turn toward the crowd. He didn't confirm it. He didn't use his name as protection. He just stood there. Because true confidence doesn't rush to announce itself. Most people, when recognized in a moment like this, would seize the advantage. They would say, "Do you know who I am?" But that question is rooted in ego. And ego was not present here. Let me ask you something. If you had influence or fame, would you use it to win an argument? Or would you rely on your character alone? Think about that carefully. Because the easiest way to prove power is to show status. The hardest way is to show restraint. The officer began noticing the shifting attention. He glanced around. The energy of the crowd was no longer neutral. It was curious. Some faces now showed recognition. Others showed something else. Disapproval. Because once people recognize a figure, the dynamic changes. Authority is no longer unquestioned. It becomes accountable. "Is there a problem here?" someone in the crowd finally asked. The officer stiffened slightly. Steven still said nothing. That silence was not weakness. It was discipline. And discipline unsettles those who expect chaos. The whispers grew louder now. "That's really him. Why is he being questioned like this? This doesn't look right." The officer's confidence flickered, just for a moment. He hadn't expected witnesses to turn into observers. He hadn't expected the man in front of him to remain so steady. And he certainly hadn't expected the situation to evolve into something bigger than a simple encounter. But it had. Because when calm meets confrontation, and calm refuses to break, it exposes everything. And what happened next was not loud. It wasn't explosive. But it carried more weight than shouting ever could. By now, the whispers were no longer subtle. People weren't just watching. They were listening. The officer could feel it, the shift in atmosphere. Authority that once felt unquestioned was now being observed from every angle. And observation changes behavior. He straightened his posture, trying to regain control of the moment. "Sir," he said firmly, "I'm going to need you to cooperate fully. This attitude isn't helping you." Attitude. It was an interesting choice of word. Because calm is often mistaken for defiance by those who expect submission. For the first time since the confrontation began, Steven Seagal took a slow step forward, not aggressively, but intentionally. Just enough to signal that he was about to speak. And when he did, his voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You're mistaking stillness for resistance," he said evenly. The officer blinked. The crowd went completely silent. Steven continued. "Authority isn't proven by pressure. It's proven by judgment." The words didn't attack. They didn't accuse. They simply stated a truth. And truth, when delivered calmly, can be more disarming than anger. Let's pause for a second. Why do words spoken quietly sometimes hit harder than shouting? Because when someone controls their emotions under pressure, it forces everyone else to examine theirs. Emotional control is rare. And rare things command attention. The officer shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable now. Steven's gaze never wavered. "You wear a badge," he said calmly. "That badge represents protection, not intimidation." A murmur rippled through the crowd. No insults. No threats. No raised tone. Just clarity. And clarity is powerful. Most people think strength is about overpowering someone. But real strength is about holding your ground without losing yourself. Let me ask you something. Do you believe real power is physical or mental? Because in this moment, there was no physical fight. Yet something powerful was happening. The officer's authority was no longer dominating the space. It was being measured against composure. And composure was winning. Steven added one final sentence, slow and deliberate. "Respect isn't demanded," he said. "It's earned by how you treat people when you don't have to." Silence. Complete silence. Even the city noise in the distance felt muted. The officer opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. Because sometimes, the strongest response to aggression isn't force. It's truth. And truth had just shifted the entire balance of power. But the moment wasn't over. Not yet. Because someone in the crowd had already made a call. And what happened next would change everything. The whisper spread like wildfire. That's Steven Seagal. Wow, the martial arts master. Wait, the movie star. Even the officer's colleagues, now arriving on the scene, recognized him. One of them gave a subtle nod, confirming what the crowd already suspected. The officer, who had been so confident just minutes ago, suddenly felt the weight of the moment. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Because sometimes, embarrassment doesn't need to be shouted. It settles quietly, deep inside. And Steven, standing there with unshakable calm, didn't gloat. He didn't mock. He didn't let fame become a weapon. He simply said, quietly, for everyone to hear, "This is not about who I am. It's about how we treat each other." A few people in the crowd nodded, understanding more than just the words, the meaning behind them. This is the moment most people misunderstand about power and influence. Real leaders don't humiliate to prove themselves. Real strength lies in teaching without anger, in guiding through example, in demonstrating that dignity and respect are far stronger than fear or intimidation. The officer now faced a choice: continue to assert authority aggressively, or accept the lesson silently. He chose the latter. And here's the part that really matters for the audience: the moment of reflection. Do you think the officer should publicly apologize for his behavior? Type yes or no in the comments. And if you respect how Steven handled this situation with calm and dignity, type respect below. Share this video with someone who believes in solving conflicts with wisdom, not aggression. The crowd began to relax. Phones lowered, whispers replaced by small nods. People realized they had witnessed more than a confrontation. They had witnessed a lesson in composure, humility, and true strength. And the officer, now fully aware of the lesson, took a step back. It was quiet, not dramatic, not explosive, but profoundly effective. The balance of power had shifted, not through force, not through fame, but through the simple, undeniable presence of self-control. And this was only the beginning. Because once the world sees moments like this, they don't forget them. By the next morning, the video had spread. Phones, social media feeds, and news outlets carried the footage across cities, countries, and continents. Millions watched a calm, composed Steven Seagal face a tense confrontation and transform it into a lesson in discipline, dignity, and respect. People were talking. Did you see how calm he stayed? That's real strength. Not everyone understands this. And they were right. Most people measure power by volume, by aggression, by dominance. But real power is control. Real power is restraint. Real power is respect, earned, not demanded. Even the officer who had caused the confrontation was now reflecting on the moment. Humility had replaced anger. Awareness had replaced aggression. And the lesson had quietly landed. How we treat others matters more than any title or position. This is more than a story about a celebrity or an authority figure. It's about psychology, about human behavior under pressure. When someone exercises calm in the face of aggression, it forces everyone else to pause, reflect, and confront their own actions. It teaches us that composure and wisdom often speak louder than power or fame ever could. Across social media, people debated, shared, and reflected. The comments were filled with messages of inspiration. Respect. Calm is the true strength. Everyone should watch this and learn. And here comes your moment, too. If you believe that strength is about control, not aggression, type respect in the comments. Share this story with someone who could use a reminder that dignity matters more than dominance. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that show the power of restraint and wisdom. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about who won an argument, or who had authority, or who had fame. It was about a simple, profound truth. Not everyone understands this. Real strength is restraint. Real power is control. Real respect is earned. And in that moment, millions of people around the world remembered that calm, measured words could change the energy of any room, and perhaps even the world itself.